Hi. Hello, hello. You can't hear? Oh, you can hear now. Can you hear me? Ah, here I'm on. Okay, you want to write in the comments? Do I need to start over? Ah, okay. Hi, Debbie. We're having some technical difficulty. The sound wasn't working. I don't know. Debbie, could you hear us? Oh, okay. Were you guys able to hear me from the start where I was telling you what I'm going to talk about? Okay, well, I think I'm going to keep going then, because it seems like you can hear me now. So I'm going to be talking about some alternatives to rice that are not grains. So they're actually seeds, but a lot of people don't realize that. And because they're seeds, they're gluten free. So if you're looking for gluten free alternatives to rice, these items will be like perfect and right up your alley. So the first one that is actually oh, you couldn't hear me from the start. Ah, I don't think you missed too much actually, so I'll just keep going. Basically, I want to talk about quinoa. I think a lot of people these days are eating quinoa, but they probably think of it more like a grain. So it's actually a seed, though. A lot of people don't realize that. And it does have more fiber and protein than rice. So it's native to South America. And a lot of people don't know that it's part of the beet and spinach family. And it has the high levels of the essential amino acids that we need in our bodies, in our diets every day. It comes in 3 different colors. So it can really look really appealing with all the other colorful plant foods that you might be eating on your plate. So it can be used in place of rice, but it also can be used in salads or like breadcrumbs even to thicken things. Like if you're doing a recipe that's making a plant burger out of some beans, sometimes it'll call for breadcrumbs and maybe people don't want to use breadcrumbs, but actually if they cook the quinoa, they can use that as a binder. And you can boil or steam or toast quinoa too. One important thing to really note about quinoa is that the outside has a very bitter coating on it. It's kind of the plant's protective mechanism to keep the bugs away and actually keep things from eating it up. So when we make quinoa, we should always try and rinse it, unless you happen to find a brand that, you know, specifically notes that it's pre-rinsed. Then it'll save you a bit of time. So try and keep that in mind if you're buying quinoa, to rinse it if you don't see that the brand has already pre-rinsed. One other thing too about quinoa is that some of these grains sometimes can get mushy if you overcook them. I mean, even rice does that too, right? So quinoa actually will not get mushy if you happen to overcook it. So that's really a cool thing. So the second thing that I want to talk about, let me just, I'm going to get rid of that banner here. Yeah, okay. So the second thing that I want to talk about is called teff. TEFF, and teff is a really, really small seed. It's actually an ancient grain from Ethiopia in the African continent, and it looks like a brown color poppy seed. It's most commonly ground into a flour, and it makes a fantastic traditional fermented bread called injera that has a wonderfully slightly sour taste. It's really, really good. It's like a cross between a pancake and a tortilla. Actually, I just love it, and it's very easy to make too. I would say that this is my favorite pseudo grain just because I love injera so much. Nutritionally, teff, when it's compared to other grains, is really high in calcium. It's also high in resistant starch, so it's good for our gut bugs. And a lot of the long distance runners that Ethiopia is so famous for claim that this teff is the secret to their endurance. Maybe it has something to do with the calcium, I'm not sure, or the fiber, but they really kind of claim that that's their health secret. So teff can be dry roasted. It can also be sauteed or simmered with water, just like rice. So you can cook it as a whole grain in a couple different ways, adding a 1-to-1 ratio of water, and then you like basically let it boil in water, let it absorb the water, and it comes out al dente, kind of like a pasta. And that'll take about 10 to 20 minutes. And then you just fluff it with a fork. You can also make it into a really creamy consistency, like a porridge, where you just increase the water. So that's going to be the case with all the grains or the seeds that we'll talk about today. So 1 cup of dried seeds would make about 3 cups cooked. So it's that same idea. When you're cooking rice, the small amount that you start with doesn't end up equaling the bigger amount that you get at the end. So let's see, our third grain, or our third seed, is called amaranth. And amaranth can be eaten both as a green or as this grain-like seed. And one way that I really found out about amaranth was in the markets here in Hong Kong, because it's really popular here. It's seasonal, but when it's in season, you see a lot of it. It's a beautiful green leaf with a bright purple kind of in the inside part of the leaf. So it's a really, really pretty leaf. So that was really one of the first leaves that I, bought when I moved here, because it's so different and so beautiful looking. And it tastes great in salads when you get the leaf young. So it's very tender and very yummy, but sometimes as it gets older, it gets a little bit tougher and bitter. So you usually want to cook it then. But we're not talking about the leaf. We're talking about the seed. So actually it's a seed that's sold, that you can actually bake similar to, or make similar to rice. It's known as being a staple food of the Aztecs, and it's been cultivated really for thousands of years. A fun thing about amaranth is that it can be toasted and it kind of can be popped, similar to popcorn. I've actually even seen it sold at the grocery stores already popped, which is much easier too, because sometimes if you try and pop it at home, the seeds end up popping all over your stovetop, and end up all over your kitchen. They really pop very high. And it's also a bit of a trick to get the temperature of your pan just right, so they can burn really easy. So if you see puffed or popped amaranth in the store, that's what that is, basically. You can also cook it similar to rice with that 1-to-1 ratio I was talking about with the teff. So very similar there. And you can also make it into a porridge if you just increase the quantity of water and let it cook a little bit longer. So amaranth is a good source of plant protein, and it's also packed with iron and calcium too. And the fiber content of amaranth, get this, the fiber content is triple the fiber content of regular wheat. So that's really cool for our guts. And it's also easily digestible too. It's a very easy to digest grain. The fourth grain we're going to talk about is called millet. And millet is originally from the African continent, but it's an important food in India and Nepal too. It's a staple really in about 1/3 of the world's diets. A lot of people eat millet around the world. But also one really cool thing that I love, if you can believe it, paleoethnobotanists, people who study older plant things, basically looked at it and saw that it was the biggest part of the Chinese diet, even more important than rice, in Chinese prehistory. And also the oldest evidence of noodles ever found was found in China in a cave, in a bowl that was 4,000 years old, and the noodles were made from millet. That was the main item that the noodles were made out of, and it was found pretty perfectly preserved. So that's kind of cool. So actually signs of the earliest cultivation of millet have been found as far back as 10,000 years ago. So it's a really cool grain. It's also rich in calcium, as well as the B vitamins, and it's high in fiber, just like all of these seeds that we've talked about today. It's an excellent source of beta carotene too, which is the precursor to vitamin A, so it's really healthy for our eyes. And it's low in simple carbs, yet high in those good complex carbs that we want to eat. So because it's also a tiny seed, it cooks really fast. And like amaranth, it can be cooked to be on the fluffy side, kind of similar to rice, like a grain. And it also can be made into a porridge. So that's really cool. The fifth grain that we're going to talk about today is buckwheat. Buckwheat is also a fruit seed, and it's related to rhubarb, one of my favorite vegetables. And it's it's the seed basically of that family. So there are really many ways to eat buckwheat as well. It's also known as being the main component of Japanese soba noodles. It's what that's made from. And you also see it in French crepes. So the French use it too in their crepes. It's sometimes sold toasted too. And in its toasted form, it's called kasha. That begins with a K. It's Kasha. And you can find kasha in grocery stores, which is basically toasted buckwheat. So it's also sold as a flour. You can find it, as I said, in the French crepes, and they use the flour version. It's usually harvested in colder climates, and it has a long history also in Asia and in Central and Eastern European countries because of how well it grows in the cold. And even though it's called buckwheat, it is not related to wheat, and it's gluten-free, just like the other seeds that we've talked about today. It's easy to cook the grains similarly to rice. You also take about 1 cup of the dry buckwheat and mix it with 2 to 3 cups of liquid, bring it to a boil, let it boil for 10 to 15 minutes, and then just strain it like pasta. And you've got yourself some buckwheat that's very similar to rice. So you can kind of experiment with how al dente you want by varying the time from 10 to 15 or 20 minutes. So, and one cool thing too about buckwheat is that it can be stored in the refrigerator and even put in the freezer with no ill effects. It's not going to turn mushy on you. So that's pretty cool. It's high in fiber and protein. It's a good source of minerals, the B vitamins, and it has a lot of antioxidants too. So basically it's a really healthy grain or seed as well. I keep calling it a grain even though they're seeds. The minerals in the cooked buckwheats are really well absorbed too by our bodies compared to other grains. So let's see, what else do I want to say here? Just wondering if anybody has any questions. Anybody still with me here? Sorry, I missed the beginning with the sound. Let's see. Well, as I watch for the comments, I'm just going to, I basically said at the beginning that I had 2 recipes for you if you stuck around to the end. So here is a recipe for a millet. It's basically a porridge for like a breakfast meal, and then a buckwheat recipe that's a little bit more like a risotto made with basil and peas. So those are really yummy. So check out those. You can find that link there. And if you download that, you'll also be put on my email newsletter list, and you'll get weekly newsletter from me with other information about how the taste of the food intersects with nutrition. Let's see. All right, Dalit, thank you. Okay. All right, so I guess that'll be it. Grab those 2 recipes, and I'll see you next week. Thanks.